It's often really tempting to say that a particular society or a particular culture or a particular religion, any kind of social grouping, has certain qualities. Like we might say that certain societies, certain countries, certain cultures are kind of inherently sexist or are inherently racist, or we kind of make those kind of pejorative generalizing statements, or a particular religion is inherently misogynistic, for example. And I'm just thinking about what that means really, and whether it's possible to make those kind of claims, and whether it's possible to, and if it is, how it's possible to measure that kind of thing. I suppose I'm prompted to think about this by the assault that was carried out recently on Lara Logan in Egypt. A female reporter was attacked by a crowd of, in this case, Egyptian men, was either raped or severely assaulted, something like that, and was subsequently saved by another group of Egyptians, and pulled out. But and people say, and one or two people have said that the attack on Lara Logan is a measure of the inherent sexism or misogyny present in Egyptian society. And other people have said, well, hang on a second, it's Egyptian people that saved her as well, so how does that work? But that's what's prompted it. But in a general sense, we do say those kind of things, don't we? So two things. Is it possible to talk about a culture in terms of things like racism or sexism or misogyny or misandry or whatever, ageism, whatever? And secondly, is it possible to measure those things? I think it might be. I think it just might be possible. I think you have to separate. First thing I think you have to do is to separate it from the people, because clearly in the example of Egypt, some people did come to her rescue, so clearly not all the people in Egypt are the same, and not all the people in any society, culture, subculture are the same. So whatever claims we might make about a society or a culture, we can't apply that to every individual within it. But I do think we have to think about the relationship between the characteristics, if such things exist, of a culture, subculture or society, and how those characteristics influence some or all of the people within it. Okay. The thing I'm thinking about at the moment, and this is about measurement really, is how you would identify whether a particular society or culture has got any of those traits. And the one I'm thinking about at the moment is a test called the Implicit Association Test, the IAT. And if you know the IAT, it'll probably be ringing alarm bells by now, because IAT measures individuals. But what I want to try to think into is whether that's whether what's actually being measured there is the inherent racism or sexism or whatever in a society. I mean, basically the IAT, I'll put a link to the site. It's a really great test. It was devised, I can't remember where now, who by, but it's all publicly available information. The IAT is a really simple set of tests which measures, as the name implies, implicit associations. The associations we have with things in our heads before conscious thought. They're implicit, they're part of the hard wiring almost of our brain, or the soft wiring of our brains. And I won't go into the details of the test, you can take them online and frighten yourself. But they basically pair different combinations of types of people and traits. So there's a very famous one which pairs black faces with either positive or negative behaviours, particularly positive and negative criminal behaviours. And it's very clear from when you take that test, and anybody takes that test almost, but certainly when majority of people in Western countries take that test, that we all have an implicit association that connects somewhere in our subconscious black faces with criminal behaviour. We find that a much more natural, it's more hardwired natural pairing in our brains. It's not natural in the world, it's natural in our minds. And other ones between things like women and domesticity, between men and careers, between a whole raft of associations. And as I say, those things are implicit. Once they're brought to a consciousness, it's easy to override them and recognise that you're being implicitly racist or sexist or whatever, and do the right thing. But what it reveals is that within any particular society, UK society, US society, Western societies generally, those implicit associations are absolutely there, because they're showing up in individual responses. But the behaviour that an individual has in response to those implicit associations, whether we actually act upon those associations, whether we actually think that people who have black faces are more likely to be criminal, whether we actually say those things and believe those things consciously and express those emotions, is enormously variable. Some of us think those things, some of us clearly don't think those things. But even the ones, as I said, even the ones who don't consciously think those things still have the association. Go on, Pop. Okay, so what is it really measuring? If there's that much difference in conscious expression and behaviour based on that, what's it actually measuring? And I think there's an argument to be made that what it's measuring there is the effect of culture on the individual. Our culture, by which I mean, the images in our TV shows and our plays and our films and our books, and our advertising, the things that we say to one another, the properties of the language itself, possibly, all of the kind of stuff that makes up a culture. Separate from the people who walk around in that culture, all of the things that make up a culture may indeed have these properties of being inherently racist or sexist or whatever. And on some level, as we grow up in a culture, by learning to speak the language, by being saturated by the images, by being familiarised with the kinds of stories and the kinds of adverts and the kind of narratives and the kinds of situations that are constantly presented to us over and over again and normalised, that we kind of grow the wiring, which grow the wiring in our brain, which makes those associations implicitly behind the scenes in the unconscious, non-conscious processes of our cognition. And they don't go away, even though we might see the folly of that kind of thing. And I would encourage anyone to take one of those IAT tests, because they are so chastening as an experience. Even though we may behave completely liberally and express our liberal values, it's very surprising and slightly frightening when you find out that the patterns of activity and expression that the culture itself contains has turned us a little bit into homophobes, and a little bit into sexists, and a little bit into racists, potentially, in the implicit wiring of our associations. So I think if you're going to find a way to measure, I suppose, let me just see if I can draw this down, because I suppose what I'm suggesting from all that is that it is potentially possible to measure whether a society, or more accurately a culture, because a society is about people, isn't it, whereas a culture is about artifact, and practices. I think it is possible to measure whether a culture is inherently sexist, misogynist, racist, and you measure it by revealing the implicit association it produces in the minds of its inhabitants, whether they act on that or not. I suppose, just to return to Lara Logan, if you were going to demonstrate that Egypt, taken in that kind of cultural way, was inherently, implicitly misogynistic, you would need to carry out IATs on a cross-section of the Egyptian population and find out their opinions on women, or the association that they had with women and subservience, and a variety of different associations that would reveal that. And you would have demonstrated that implicit association was present in the minds of most Egyptians, and of course most of them would never act on that, and would consciously use their rational, logical thought to override those cultural associations. But some won't.